Okay, good morning, everybody. Is everybody sitting comfortably? Everyone got water? No, they haven't, but you can get it outside if you need it. So we've got under an hour now to give you a quick introduction to the Tombolo Digital Connector, which is something that we introduced yesterday, but we're also going to go over it again very quickly this morning if you're not used to it. My name is Joseph Bailey. I'm a data scientist here at Future Cities Catapult. And I just want to make it clear that we don't want to hinder you from hacking, so if you want to try working on stuff whilst I'm presenting, please feel free to do so. So as a quick summary, we're going to go through the digital connector for the first sort of 45 to 50 minutes. We're going to talk primarily about the resources. Then Lorena's kindly going to give us an overview of the structure of the software and how it works. We're going to give you a quick demonstration of what it can do. Then we're going to have sort of 15 to 20 minutes for you guys to get stuck in, have some free time. And then I'm going to pass over to Ed, who's kindly going to present space syntax open mapping, which is another one of the many data sources that we've got available here for the hackathon this weekend, and we think it's really got an opportunity to bolster some of the analyses or tools that you create. One thing I want to reiterate is we released some of the information about this piece of software online through the email blasts in the upcoming weeks. If some of you have already had the opportunity to download it and start playing and you don't really like workshops but you just want to learn a little bit more, then feel free to get started whilst I'm talking. And if you do get started and you have any issues, please feel free to raise your hand. We've got some mentors around the room, the wonderful team that essentially created this piece of software, so they'll be happy to help you with any issues with installation or getting things running. These are the faces in the room. Some of these will be able to help, so don't hesitate to ask them. I also want to make it clear that the session is not comprehensive, so we won't cover every aspect of the digital connector, and asking questions is an opportunity for us to develop insight and for everyone to share knowledge. So it's great for connecting different kinds of open source data, but if you've got your own private data as well, you can also use that and incorporate it into the analysis that you're doing. And it's particularly good at generating things like indexes with respect to things like social isolation index or accessibility index or maybe even an active travel index, which is some of the stuff that we presented yesterday. So all of the information about the Tombolo Digital Connector is online, and we've got a load of documentation here. I think it would be useful if you are interested in cloning it or downloading it, if you guys could just navigate to this page now. Can I just see a show of hands of people that have already been here and have already downloaded it? Is there any issues or feedback with respect to that? Is everything gone okay so far? Yes, a few nods. Thank you very much. Okay, so the other thing is this weekend, our goals generally are to make cities better using data, and we believe that the digital connector is one of many tools that can help facilitate that. What we want to do is continue doing so by augmenting it with you and enriching it this weekend. So please do your best to be positive with your feedback, but make sure that if it's even if it's the tiniest thought, or even if it's just a sketch, that you can provide it back to us potentially in the form of an issue or in terms of verbal feedback. So I'm just going to go through some of the learning resources that we've made available for this, and there's quite a few, but hopefully they're there in a logical flow and they can be very useful with respect to getting started. We've got 3 different installation guides for a range of operating systems. I can see already we've got some PCs and Macs in the room. I don't know if anybody's running Ubuntu, but we've also got an installation guide for that. We've got a quick start on the README, which hopefully has enabled some of you to get up and running. Some of you might at the moment be trying to install the software, and so this is a really useful opportunity to look at that. Once you've got it installed, we've also got an introduction tutorial, and that tutorial will walk you through the process of bringing in data from the King's College London's air quality sensor network and spitting it out on a sort of London-wide scale with respect to most recent data records from that particular network. And then we've also got a thorough documentation section, which is, again, also available through the README. One thing I would also like to say is that we've made it possible for people to write recipes for the Tombolo Digital Connector using Python, and there's a Python implementation, which is something that we're going to talk about a little bit later on. If you're a data scientist, this is one of the easiest ways of getting to grips with writing pretty complicated recipes that can combine data from multiple different sources. For example, Thanos recently combined how many different pieces of information in one recipe? Was it Thanos? So yeah, we're pulling on a multitude of different pieces of information made available through the Open Data Store and through, let's say, the London Borough of Barking and Dagenham. So again, to reiterate, Could you put your hands up if you're addressing the travel planning issue this weekend? Excellent. And what about social isolation? And skills and employability? So no one for skills in here. Okay, that's fine. But just be aware that not only do you have all of this information from these different sources, you've also got a summary of that from the digital connector. So it's all very well just showing all of these logos, but in fact, what does that actually mean? If you want to get a thorough summary of all the data that is currently available through the Tombolo Digital Connector, we've created something called a data catalog. And that data catalog is just a JSON file which shows you the ID, all of the information about the particular data set itself, and also its label and name so you can start leveraging it in recipes. And I think that's got thousands of different data sources in it. So it might be worth searching through that. And that is available at this URL here. So it's already in the code base. And then we've also got the opportunity to enrich all the information from the Tombolo Digital Connector using all of the information that's kindly provided by our challenge setters, our sponsors. And so for the example of active travel, if you were to click on that, which is actually at this URL, you'd see that there's further reading, there's open data available, and if you're doing the travel planning challenge, we've also got a load of data which has been provided by TfL, which if you sign the NDA, then we're happy to make available to you for use in this weekend's hackathon. So please speak to any of the mentors if you want to be able to access that. Something that we find useful as well when we're, as a development team, when we've been developing the Tombolo Digital Connector is other tools and also this other data which hasn't necessarily been mentioned enough. One is Transport API, which Jonathan is here to represent. Thank you, Jonathan. It's a fantastic resource for open source transport information, including both bus timetables, tube, train timetables, etc. And that's all free and online for use. So if you want to leverage that, please let us know. If you were here yesterday, you saw presentations from Thingful, from Ordnance Survey, and from EMU. And we've also, of course, got our City Data Explorer, which is something that can be used to visualize and bring to life all of the things which come out of the Tombolo Digital Connector. And then, because it's a primarily Java-based tool, we tend to use IntelliJ, and there is a community edition if you want to have a play around with that online when using the Tombolo Digital Connector. We also tend to use things like Visual Studio Code, Homebrew, and QGIS. So I've already seen some people this morning using QGIS as well. So please bear in mind that the digital connector itself works best in unison with other analysis tools. So I'm just going to pass on over to Lorena now, who's going to talk a little bit about the internals and structure of the digital connector.
Hi everyone. Before starting and going a little bit further on the key parts of the digital connector, I would like to remind you something about the digital connector on GitHub. So now we have the City Data Hack Organization, where you are going to put all the information and all the things you are going to produce during this hackathon. But I would really like to bring the focus on our repo, which is very important to us. We'd like you to like it and fork it so we can trend. We like trending, at least for Java on GitHub. Please do so. Thumbs up. And also please give us feedback, raising issues, finding bugs, and also everything that you might find helping us to develop the digital connector further. So the key parts of the digital connector. Let's start with the importers. The importers are data fetchers. So basically these are the parts, they are Java classes that connect to the sources of data and bring them in a centralized data format. As John mentioned before, we include built-in importers for many data sources that you saw the logos before, but you can also include the data, your personal data. And the centralized data format is a way that we have found to make it easier to combine and modify this data coming from different data sets. This is a simple diagram explaining how it is working inside. So the digital connector has a Postgres database, which is organized in this way. So we have the provider, which identifies the source, and one of the main entities of it is a subject. Think about it as a member of a data set, and this subject have characteristics identified by the attributes, which can have fixed values if their values do not change over time, or time values, which we use extensively for time series. One of the most important parts of the digital connector are also the recipes. This is where you start from. So the recipes are JSON files, which have a declarative recipe language, and they help you specify what kinds of information you want as an output, what kind of data you want to fetch, and how do you want to combine this data. These recipes are actually used to generate model indexes, where the digital connector is very good at, and we already have templates for these recipes. You can find them in our examples and resources of the source code. Annotated recipe example that looks like this. So for example, this is like a recipe. And here, this annotated example explains to you which parts do you need to specify. And so the subjects is what you want as an output, which kind of sources you want, what you want them for. And the first case you want for the subjects as an output, and the other one to calculate and make the arithmetic or geographic calculations here in the fields. And as I mentioned before, we have examples in the code, but it's also possible to build recipes in Python. And what it's going to do is helping the people that find JSON a little bit too complicated because you forget the brackets, and you can build it in Python, and it will also, your IDE will help you with IntelliSense, of course, also make it easier to build them. And here is a proof, or a picture of a proof that you can do it. And this is like one of the examples that we have in the Python repo built in a Jupyter notebook. And yes, as I said, we want you to use the digital connector, at least give it a try, because we think that it will be very helpful for you to address the challenges of this weekend. And we have also created some thematic recipes for the challenges, for example, social isolation and the other challenges you have chosen today. And this could be like a starting point for you to bring further using digital connector or the other tools you are familiar with. After you have finished and you have an output from Digital Connector, it does not stop there, because we have this amazing City Data Explorer, which allows you to visualize the maps and or your output and play with the colors, amazing colors there. And also you can share on social media or on Twitter, hashtag future cities and the city data hack, and you can see what you have built and show the others, your colleagues, or also during the presentation what you came up with. And that's it. Thank you very much. And like the Digital Connector on GitHub so we can trend. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lorena. So just as an example flow, because this is something I realized I didn't really know for a while, but I'd never really thought about in terms of how it actually works. So when you run a recipe in the Tombolo Digital Connector, you use Gradle to execute that particular task. And that task is known as run export, which is hopefully something that you'll be able to see in the README. But when you do that, the connector then goes out to the sort of original data sources using the importers that we've developed and downloads that data from sources, or if you've already done it before, it will source from your temporary files, and then it will build or do the arithmetic as you've already specified. So for example, if you're running a recipe for the first time and you're covering the entire UK region, it might take quite a while, but if you're doing something just for a London area, or let's say the London borough of Barking and Dagenham, hopefully it would be quite quick. And if you've already got that data downloaded locally, the next time you run a recipe, it will be very quick. So if you modify it in some way, for example, it might help speed things up. Once you've done that, the connector will likely generate some GeoJSON for you to investigate or analyze further or visualize in the City Data Explorer, and then you can view it or share it, as Lorena just mentioned, as appropriate. So I'm just going to give you an example of one of the flows that we've been through before, which can help us generate something like this. So it's very difficult to imagine how, when you're staring at a README and a load of code, how it can translate into something that's a bit more tangible. And so this is an example of our active travel index, which was actually created by Borka, who's one of the mentors here today. And this combines information from a range of different sources. But creating something like this has not only just come from the City Data Explorer tool itself, it's also part and parcel paired with the Tombolo Digital Connector. So for example, in this particular circumstance, the challenge was to better understand the propensity for active transport throughout different cities in England. So how can we better understand that particular challenge? And so, of course, we developed Tombolo Digital Connector, and we acknowledge the fact that it's really good at bringing in data from lots of different sources. And so we built a recipe, which looks like this, to help address that. And as Lorena's already said, we wanted to output all of this information on the lower super output area level, which is, if you're not familiar with it, it's a census geography, which I think has around 1,500 people in. Someone correct me if they know I'm wrong, generally. I'm looking at Ed here. Okay. So a few thousand people in it, and there's quite a few. There's around, I think, 36,000 LSOAs in the whole of England. And then we specify the fact that we're bringing in data relating to these LSOAs, and then we also specify how we want the recipe to combine different fields and output this information. And there's lots of, as Lorena suggested, there's lots of examples on this recipe. But specifically, I've just moved the recipe over to the left here. This particular field that we've created as part of the recipe is a summary of all of these. So this is the generation of an index. But then we also bring information in from the Department for Transport. We bring in information from OpenStreetMap, so that is relationship between the number of highways that actually have cycle lanes in a particular area. This is the information we get from Department for Transport is the proportion of traffic that is represented by cyclists. And then we also bring in information from the Office of National Statistics, which is related to the proportion of commuters who travel to work by walking or cycling. So there's lots of different data sources there, and if you were to do that in real life, you'd probably have an API to deal with a really randomly formatted Excel sheet and some CSV that would take probably a few hours of wrangling just to get sorted. And then if you wanted to repeat that, you'd probably have to do it all again for a different place. So the idea of the recipe in the Tombolo Digital Connector is that it saves that time. So once we've combined those pieces of information, we get our output GeoJSON, which has got lots of different information in it, and then we can visualize that around here and then begin to make inferences. So for example, in this case, the higher proportion or the higher values on the bottom right suggest a higher propensity for active travel. And you can see here there's a bit of an interesting egg shape around London where the royal parks and things in all of the royal boroughs or the boroughs up on Thames, as we discussed last night, tend to have a higher propensity for that active travel. So that's just an example of how you might go from challenge to through the digital connector to a visualization and then start thinking about analysis and making inferences. You can do it on a range of geospatial scales, so you can do it on, so you can see here that this is LSOAs. There's probably about a few thousand people live in these polygons. There's a lot more that live in the local authorities in London, and you can address information on that level. You can also have a look at street segments themselves. You can export point data, polygons, et cetera, So it's very, very flexible and gives you the opportunity to communicate what you've done through the City Data Explorer as well. So as we sort of have continually reiterated today, we really want as much feedback as possible. We'd like it through issues, but any way in which you can record what you're doing, either through the City Data Hack repo that Eddie's set up or through the Tombolo Digital Connector repo itself. Please star everything, and as Aisling said earlier, she's going to be coming around asking you questions. Just write things down and speak to us, and from now on in, with respect to the digital connector, we've got the opportunity essentially to just get started. And here's a list of the things that would be great if you could start trying.